In a world where desperation drives people to unimaginable choices, Ramon Suarez's story begins with a heart-wrenching decision. Struggling under the weight of crippling debt and threats to his family's safety, Ramon makes a deal that will forever change his life and that of his daughter, Lucia. For $1,000, he agrees to surrender her to a ruthless drug lord, El Jaguar. The promise of financial relief is overshadowed by the pain of betrayal and the horror of watching his daughter's fate slip away. As the days pass, Ramon's guilt and regret consume him. The house, once a home, now feels like a prison of remorse, and his attempts to drown out the torment with alcohol only deepen his despair. In a shocking turn, Ramon's path crosses with Lucia's once more, but this time it is not for reconciliation. Instead, he finds himself face to face with the consequences of his actions, as Lucia has transformed into the very person he once feared, the right hand of El Jaguar, now holding him accountable for his betrayal. Witness a dramatic journey from hope and happiness to heartache and redemption as Ramon faces the ultimate reckoning with his daughter and the dark choices he made. If you are not subscribed, I recommend you subscribe and activate the bell to avoid missing any videos. In a moment of utter desperation and moral collapse, a father sacrifices his flesh and blood for a mere $1,000, selling his beloved daughter to a merciless drug lord. 2 months later, on a suffocating summer night, Ramon Suarez's legs quivered uncontrollably as 2 ominous men with darkened intentions demanded that he enter a black van. The weight of his treacherous actions hung over him like a heavy shroud of regret and fear. Standing in the doorway of his daughter Lucia's modest room, Ramon was bathed in the cold glow of the moonlight that seeped through the shattered window. It cast a serene and innocent light on the 18-year-old girl who lay peacefully asleep, blissfully unaware of the impending doom that loomed over them. At the age of 45, worn down by the ceaseless grind of life's hardships and relentless anxieties, Ramon felt the crushing burden of his choices and the harsh realities of existence. His weary eyes roamed the dilapidated confines of their home, settling on the cracks in the walls and the sagging ceiling that threatened to cave in. Every inch of that crumbling house was a testament to their profound poverty and crushing despair. Ramon closed his eyes. He was assailed by a barrage of haunting memories. His mind replayed the agonizing image of his wife, Elena, her eyes red and swollen from crying as she painstakingly counted out coins to purchase essential medicine. He remembered the menacing threats from ruthless loan sharks, their fists hammering relentlessly on the door in the dead of night. The anguish of seeing his younger son, Pedro, shivering with fever, and the paralyzing terror of being unable to afford a hospital visit surged back with vivid intensity. The shrill, harsh ring of his cell phone ripped him from his tormenting thoughts. With hands that shook uncontrollably, Ramon fumbled with the battered device. The voice on the other end was cold, menacing, and devoid of empathy. "You have 24 hours to come up with the payment, Suarez, or your family will pay dearly with their lives." The call ended abruptly, leaving Ramon engulfed in a suffocating silence. His gaze fell upon Lucia, and a piercing pain pierced through his heart. How had he reached such a desperate and damning juncture? How could he possibly safeguard his family from the calamity he had ushered in? With a heavy heart and a soul burdened with dread, Ramon trudged to the kitchen. Amidst a sea of overdue bills and grim eviction notices, he unearthed a crumpled card, its golden letters proclaiming quick solutions for tough problems. He had kept it tucked away, a haunting reminder of a day he had hoped would never come. That day, however, had arrived with merciless certainty. With his heart racing in his chest, Ramon dialed the number printed on the card. On the third ring, a deep, ominous voice answered. "I have a proposition for you, Suarez, but be warned, the cost is steep." Ramon cast one last sorrowful glance towards Lucia's room, his resolve hardening. "I'll do whatever it takes," he whispered with a sense of grim resignation. sealing his fate and that of his family's future. In stark contrast to his disheveled appearance, Ramon entered the restaurant La Rosa Dorada, an opulent sanctuary of luxury that gleamed like a mirage amidst the city's harsh reality. Dressed in a tattered shirt and scuffed shoes, Ramon stood out like a figure from a bygone era against the extravagant backdrop. Across from him sat El Jaguar, a man in his 50s exuding an air of predatory sophistication, his perfectly tailored attire and sinister grin conveying a chilling sense of dominance. $1,000, Suarez El Jaguar said smoothly, sliding a manila envelope across the polished mahogany table. This amount will ensure your daughter Lucia's safety. A fair trade, don't you agree? Ramon felt a wave of dread wash over him as the air seemed to evaporate from his lungs. His hands quivered as he opened the envelope, revealing stacks of cash he had never seen in one place before. For a fleeting moment, he envisioned a future where debts were paid and his family was secure, but the image of Lucia, his cherished daughter, struck him with a gut-wrenching force. "No, I can't do this," Ramon stammered, pushing the envelope back across the table. "She's my daughter, for God's sake." El Jaguar's smile remained unwavering, though his eyes grew colder and more unyielding. With a disinterested flick, he pulled out his phone and showed Ramon a series of chilling photographs: Elena exiting the supermarket, Pedro playing innocently in the park, and Lucia standing at the threshold of her school. "Your family is under my surveillance." Suarez El Jaguar's voice was soft but dripping with menace. "Agree to the deal, and your debt will be absolved. Your family will be safe." Refuse, and his gaze lingered on the envelope, a storm of guilt, fear, and desperation churning within him. Sensing Ramon's hesitation, El Jaguar produced a wad of cash and slid it towards him. "Consider this an advance," he said quietly. To demonstrate my seriousness, with trembling hands, Ramon took the money, each bill feeling like a heavy weight on his conscience. He looked at El Jaguar and in that moment knew that he had bartered away his very soul. "I accept," Ramon whispered, the words searing his throat. El Jaguar's satisfaction was palpable as he smiled. "Welcome to the business, Suarez. Your daughter is now under my control." In the cramped confines of the Suarez home, an unbearable tension hung in the air, as if a taut rope was on the verge of snapping. Lucia, her dark eyes brimming with suspicion, observed her father with growing unease as he moved restlessly about the living room. Over the past few days, a marked change had come over Ramon, and Lucia was determined to uncover the cause of his increasingly erratic behavior. "What's happening, Dad?" she demanded, her voice steady despite the fear simmering beneath the surface. "You've been acting so strangely. What are you keeping from me?" Ramon averted his gaze, his hands quivering slightly as he busied himself with a clutter of papers on the table. "Nothing, my dear. Just some grown-up issues," he mumbled evasively. But Lucia was not easily deceived. With a steely resolve, she marched to her parents' bedroom and began rifling through the contents under the mattress. Her fingers brushed against something in an envelope. Lucia's heart raced, but she remained silent as Ramon burst into the room, his face pale and drawn. It was too late. Lucia had already opened the envelope, her eyes widening in shock at the sight of the cash inside. "Where did this come from, Dad?" Lucia's voice wavered, laced with trepidation. "What have you done?" Caught in the unrelenting grip of desperation, Ramon unraveled. His confession spilled out like a torrent of poison, recounting his grim deal with El Jaguar. Lucia listened in horror as the fabric of her world disintegrated before her eyes. "You sold me out," she screamed, her face contorted with a mixture of rage and heartache. Tears streamed down her cheeks as her voice broke with every word. "Your daughter." "I had no choice," Ramon pleaded desperately. "They would have killed us all." The argument that erupted was a maelstrom of pent-up resentment and years of hidden grievances. Lucia attempted to flee, but Ramon seized her arm, his desperation evident. "Let me go," Lucia cried out, struggling against his grip. In the chaotic scuffle, Lucia lost her balance and crashed into the edge of the table, a trickle of blood oozing from the gash on her head. Ramon, his heart pounding with horror, fumbled with his phone, his hands shaking uncontrollably. "It's done," he said with a voice heavy with defeat as he answered the call. "I accept the deal." Outside, the menacing hum of a powerful engine pierced the silence of the night. A sleek, black van came to a halt outside the Suarez home. El Jaguar emerged with predatory grace, flanked by two imposing figures. Ramon opened the door, his expression a mask of anguish and resignation. Lucia, semi-conscious and with an improvised bandage around her head, lay on the sofa. El Jaguar's cold smile was unperturbed as he surveyed the scene with a calculating gaze. Neighbors, drawn by the commotion, peered nervously from their windows and doorways, but none dared intervene. The palpable aura of El Jaguar's power kept them rooted in fear. With a curt gesture, El Jaguar instructed his men to remove Lucia from the house. Ramon watched in helpless despair as they carried his daughter toward the van, his desire to protest stifled by paralyzing dread. "Your share of the bargain," El Jaguar said, sliding a heavy briefcase toward Ramon. $1,000, as agreed. Ramon took the briefcase, feeling its weight like a burden of guilt and betrayal. "Remember this," Suarez El Jaguar's voice was a low, threatening growl. "She's mine now. If you utter a word, if you attempt any form of resistance, your family will suffer." As the van pulled away, taking Lucia with it, Ramon stood rooted in the street, clutching the price of his daughter's freedom. The stares of the neighbors burned into him, a mix of pity, repulsion, and fear. Police sirens began to wail in the distance, oblivious to the tragedy that had just unfolded. Ramon looked down at his hands, stained with his daughter's blood and the drug lord's money. He sank to his knees on the sidewalk, the weight of his decisions crushing him. The sirens grew louder, but for Ramon, the world had collapsed into a void. At that moment, he realized that he had lost far more than his daughter. He had forfeited his very soul. 2 months had passed, but for Ramon Suarez, each day was a relentless descent into a living nightmare. The money he had received for Lucia had alleviated their financial burdens, but the emotional toll was insurmountable. His once familiar home now felt like a prison of guilt and unending remorse. Ramon had become a shadow of the man he once was, his eyes hollowed and encircled by dark rings from countless sleepless nights. The bottle of alcohol had become his only solace, a desperate attempt to drown out the agonizing cries of his conscience. Elena, his wife, regarded him with a mixture of contempt and sorrow. "Where is my daughter?" Elena demanded each day, her eyes piercing through him with accusations. "What did you do to Lucia?" Ramon had no answers, only silence and the bitter solace of alcohol. Nightmares plagued him with relentless fury. Lucia's voice echoed in his dreams, pleading for help as he walked away, his hands tainted with the blood money he had accepted. One night, utterly inebriated, Ramon made a fateful decision. Stumbling into the street, he resolved to confess everything to the police, to turn himself in. Perhaps this was his chance to save Lucia and find some semblance of redemption. As he staggered through the darkened streets, his mind clouded by the haze of alcohol and guilt, he failed to notice the black van trailing him. It was only when the vehicle screeched to a halt beside him that Ramon realized his past had caught up with him. 2 formidable men emerged from the van. Ramon recognized them immediately as the same individuals who had taken Lucia away on that fateful night. "El Jaguar wants to see you," one of them said, his voice cold and unfeeling. Ramon's heart lurched with a mix of fear and dread. He had known this reckoning would come, but he was ill-prepared for its arrival. As they forcefully pushed him into the van, a thought flickered through his tormented mind. Was this his final judgment, or could it, against all odds, be an opportunity for redemption? The van navigated through the city's labyrinthine streets, its path twisting and turning until Rahman was disoriented and lost. Inside the van, the atmosphere was suffused with a deathly silence, occasionally broken by the creak of leather seats and Rahman's labored breathing. The two men flanking him remained impassive, their eyes concealed behind dark glasses even in the dead of night. Rahman felt their cold, evaluative stares, relentless scrutiny that heightened his anxiety. His mind raced with dark thoughts. He envisioned his imminent demise, imagined his body discarded in some forsaken alley, the thought of Elena's anguish at never knowing what had become of him or Lucia. Regret overwhelmed him, drowning him in a maelstrom of what-ifs that threatened to drive him to madness. After what felt like an eternity, the van came to a halt in front of a grand, imposing mansion. Rahman blinked in confusion. This was not the grim fate he had anticipated. The men ushered him inside, their footsteps echoing ominously on the polished marble floor. What Rahman saw inside took his breath away. The walls, adorned with gold-framed photographs, featured images of Lucia, but not the girl he remembered. This Lucia exuded an aura of sophistication and power, her gaze a blend of cold detachment and steely resolve. In one photograph, she was seen alongside El Jaguar, both of them smiling with a group of businessmen. "What is this?" Rahman murmured, his voice barely audible. No one answered. They guided him through a series of long corridors to a grand oak door. One of the men opened it, pushing Rahman gently inside. There, seated behind an imposing desk, was Lucia. Her eyes met her father's, and time seemed to stand still. "Hello, Dad." Lucia's voice was chillingly icy. "Welcome to my world." The silence in the opulent office was dense, almost palpable. Rahman, his mouth dry and his heart racing, stared at his daughter as though she were a ghost. Lucia slowly rose from her chair, her designer suit accentuating a presence that was no longer the girl he once knew. Her eyes, once warm and lively, now bore a hardness that sent a shiver down Rahman's spine. "You've changed," Rahman managed to whisper, his voice cracking. A cold smile curled on Lucia's lips. "People change when they're sold like cattle." Dad, each word was a blade to Rahman's heart. He attempted to approach, but Lucia raised a hand, halting him with an authoritative gesture. "You're not here for a family reunion," she stated sharply. "You're here because I ordered it." Lucia began her tale with a spark of fierce pride and a shadow of lingering bitterness. She recounted the harrowing days when she was handed over to the notorious Jaguar, her initial fear giving way to a steely resolve. With a blend of ingenuity and audacity, she navigated the treacherous waters of the drug empire, gradually earning the trust of the feared kingpin. Her transformation from an outsider to his most trusted confidante was nothing short of extraordinary. "And you know what, Dad?" she said, her voice resonating with a mixture of triumph and scorn. "I've discovered a remarkable talent within me for this world of shadows, far exceeding anything you ever demonstrated in being a decent father." Each of her words cut into Rahman like a knife, each one amplifying his sense of guilt and regret. "Lucia, I had no other option. They would have exterminated us all," he pleaded, his voice trembling with a desperate attempt at justification. Lucia's laughter, devoid of warmth, echoed through the room. "Choices, Dad, there are always choices. And now, you're about to face the repercussions of yours." With a swift snap of her fingers, two burly men entered the room. "Take him away," Lucia commanded coldly. "From now on, he is under my service. He has a moral debt to repay." As they dragged him out, Rahman was engulfed by a chilling realization his daughter had not only survived the cruel fate he had sentenced her to, but had emerged as his new captor. 2 months prior, at the break of dawn, Lucia was thrust into the opulent yet menacing Jaguar's mansion, her heart pounding and tears still wet on her cheeks. She faced the cold, predatory gaze of her new master. "Welcome to your new reality, darling," the Jaguar intoned with a sinister smile, his icy demeanor sending shivers down Lucia's spine. The initial days were a relentless torment. Every moment was filled with degradation, threats, and an overwhelming sense of dread. Yet, instead of succumbing to despair, Lucia's heart hardened into a formidable shield. She observed, learned, and absorbed every facet of the criminal operation. In the Jaguar's office, she unearthed documents that exposed a traitor within the ranks. With careful deliberation, she brought the evidence to the drug lord, who, impressed by her astuteness, chose to reward her with his protection. "You've got real guts, girl," he remarked, a flicker of genuine respect in his gaze. From that pivotal moment, Lucia became the Jaguar's relentless shadow, mastering the intricate and dangerous world of the cartel. Every lesson learned, every secret acquired, she stored away as weapons for her inevitable revenge. In the present, she observed her father performing demeaning tasks throughout the mansion. Though a part of her savored his suffering, another, more concealed part mourned for the innocence she had lost. Lost in these reflections, she was jolted back to reality by the Jaguar's voice. Lucia turned with a facade of icy detachment. "Just ensuring he does his job," the Jaguar said, his voice dripping with malevolence. "I've always wondered how a reunion of vengeful daughter and betraying father would play out. It's quite fascinating." Though she maintained her exterior calm, inside, Lucia's mind raced. The Jaguar was orchestrating a perilous game, and she couldn't afford to be merely a pawn. Her quest for vengeance would have to be postponed. Survival was now her paramount concern. The Jaguar's mansion was alive with frenetic energy as servants scurried about, preparing for the grand event that evening. Ramon, clad in a waiter's uniform, observed the chaos with a mix of awe and revulsion as he polished crystal glasses. His eyes remained locked on Lucia, who moved with an air of regal authority, directing every detail of the evening's preparations. It was as if he was witnessing a stranger, someone with the visage of his little girl, but unrecognizably transformed. As night descended, the mansion thrummed with the presence of influential politicians, wealthy businessmen, and celebrities, all engaging in a symphony of superficial pleasantries and hushed conversations. With a tray in hand, Ramon navigated among the guests, serving champagne while overhearing fragments of conversations that ignited his anger. "The shipment will arrive on Tuesday," one man in a tailored suit said. "It's secured." "No issues expected," replied another with a laugh. The Jaguar made his dramatic entrance, flanked by Lucia, who wore a striking red dress that aged her beyond her years. "My esteemed guests," the Jaguar announced, his voice resonating through the room. "I present to you my protégée, Lucia, the future leader of our organization." Applause thundered around Ramon, each clap a painful reminder of the shattered dreams he now faced. What had become of his beloved daughter? Desperate to maintain his composure, Ramon approached a nearby group to serve champagne. It was then that he overheard something that froze him in place. "With the new route through Central America, our profits will triple," the Jaguar declared. Ramon's gaze swept across the room, recognizing faces from the media, judges, senators, even a high-ranking minister. The enormity of the corruption enveloped him like a cold wave. His eyes met Lucia's for a fleeting moment. He thought he saw a trace of her former self, but her hardened facade didn't. "Watch yourself," Dad, Lucia whispered as she passed by. "One misstep and the entire family will suffer." Ramon realized with a sinking feeling that they were ensnared in a web of power and malevolence from which escape seemed impossible. Meanwhile, Detective Hernandez rubbed his weary face, his eyes bloodshot and fixed on a city map cluttered with notes and photographs. He had been tirelessly tracking a series of disappearances linked to the Jaguar's cartel, and finally felt he was on the cusp of a breakthrough. Resolute, he made his way to the decrepit Suarez neighborhood, where narrow streets and crumbling houses painted a grim picture of poverty. He knocked on the door of a modest house with a red door, his heart racing. "Good afternoon," Hernandez greeted as a distressed woman answered. "I'm Detective Hernandez, investigating recent disappearances in this area. Initially hesitant, the woman eventually allowed him inside. The somber atmosphere and photographs of vanished individuals weighed heavily on him. "My daughter. She's been missing for a year," the woman's voice quivered. "She worked at a club, but she disappeared. I fear she got entangled with the wrong crowd." Hernandez's heart sank as connections began to form. "Do you have any additional details about her life, or who she might have been involved with?" he inquired. The woman handed him a small photo. "This is Lucia. She always dreamt of a better life." Hernandez's eyes widened as he studied the photograph of a younger, seemingly innocent Lucia. He had a new lead and understood that dismantling the Jaguar's empire could not only rescue Lucia, but also countless others ensnared in corruption and crime. The enigmatic Ramon Suarez, whose disappearance was shrouded in mystery, was intricately tied to the sinister figure known as the Jaguar. Within the opulent yet oppressive confines of the Jaguar's mansion, an almost tangible sense of dread hung in the air. The drug lord, his smile cold and devoid of genuine warmth, cast a calculating glance toward Lucia. "I have an exceptionally delicate assignment for you," he intoned, his voice dripping with veiled menace. "It concerns a family that has been a persistent thorn in my side." Lucia, her face a mask of impenetrable stoicism, nodded in silent acknowledgement. "What exactly do you require of me?" she inquired, her voice steady despite the storm brewing within her. The Jaguar's smile stretched wider, a sinister light dancing in his eyes as he revealed the brutal reality she was about to face. "Deal with them, Lucia. I want them erased from existence permanently." Her heart pounded with a mix of dread and determination as she accepted the ruthless task. She understood that the path she was about to tread was fraught with bloodshed and treachery, and that her choices from this point forward would not only shape her destiny, but also influence the fate of her estranged father and countless others ensnared in the intricate web of power that had ensnared her. As Lucia's hand shook with the weight of her decision, she murmured a sorrowful apology, her eyes reflecting a torrent of conflicting emotions. At that crucial moment, her resolve faltered, and she found herself unable to pull the trigger. Instead, she concocted a perilous plan. She staged a mock execution, concealed the accountant in hiding, and fabricated convincing evidence of his death for the Jaguar. The drug lord, taken aback by what he perceived as Lucia's chilling resolve, rewarded her with increased responsibilities, a testament to her perceived loyalty. "You have demonstrated your allegiance," he declared, his eyes gleaming with a dangerous blend of pride and menace. Meanwhile, Ramon, a silent and horrified observer of his daughter's metamorphosis, grappled with a tumultuous mix of dread and relief. He watched as Lucia navigated the precarious boundary between survival and the complete erosion of her humanity. That night, in a shadowed corner of the world, father and daughter were set to confront the haunting realities of their intertwined fates. In the dimly lit corners of the sprawling Jaguar mansion, Detective Hernandez observed with a relentless gaze, piecing together every fragment of evidence, listening to every hushed conversation. He was a shadow in the darkness, waiting for the right moment to strike, to deliver justice where it was so desperately needed. The mansion itself was a pressure cooker, its tension thick in the air, like a wire straining under too much weight, ready to snap at any second. Lucia's footsteps echoed through the grand halls, each step carrying the weight of impending doom. The drug lord, his eyes narrowing as he watched Lucia approach, was a portrait of dangerous elegance. Admiration flickered in his gaze, but it was tainted with suspicion. His voice was as smooth as silk, yet as dangerous as a venomous snake. "My dear," he murmured, his words dripping with false affection, "you've become a vital asset to our operation. But you know, in this treacherous world, trust is the only currency that matters." Louis stood by, his expression a mask of calm, even as his heart thundered in his chest. "Of course, sir. Loyalty is my guiding principle," he replied, his voice steady. The jaguar smiled, but the gesture was cold, devoid of warmth, like a predator toying with its prey. "I'm pleased to hear that," he said, his voice a low growl, "because I have one final test for you." From his desk, he pulled out an envelope and handed it to Lucia. Inside the envelope were photographs, images that froze Lucia's blood. They showed Ramon, her father, very much alive and hidden somewhere within the mansion's walls. The jaguar's voice was laced with a chilling menace as he spoke. "It seems your father is harder to kill than we anticipated," he said, his words hanging in the air like a death sentence. "I want you to finish the job, this time in front of me." Lucia felt her world tilt on its axis. The ground beneath her seemed to vanish, leaving her mind racing, desperately searching for a way to save her father without betraying her precarious position. She fought to keep her voice steady as the jaguar's cold eyes bore into her. "Any hesitation?" he asked, his tone dripping with suspicion. "None," Sir Lucia replied, her voice firm, though her heart was gripped with terror. "It will be done as you command." As she exited the room, her composure nearly crumbled when she crossed paths with Ramon, who was cleaning the floors like a ghost among the living. Their eyes locked, a silent exchange of fear, desperation, and unspoken words that tore at Lucia's soul. Unbeknownst to them, Detective Hernandez had overheard the entire conversation. Every word, every threat had solidified his resolve. It was time to act, even if it meant blowing his cover. The clock was ticking, and the lives of Lucia, Ramon, and the entire Jaguar organization were teetering on a knife's edge. The next few hours would decide who would emerge from this nightmare and who would perish. Night descended upon the mansion like a shroud, thick with the weight of impending chaos. Lucia's heart raced as she steeled herself for the grim task ahead. In a secluded room, Ramon awaited his fate, his hands trembling, his mind a storm of regret and fear. Meanwhile, Detective Hernandez, still concealed in the mansion's shadows, moved with silent determination, ready to intervene at the first sign of danger. The Jaguar assembled his most trusted men in the mansion's grand hall, creating a sinister circle of witnesses. They were there to see the bloodshed, to watch Lucia prove her allegiance in the most brutal way possible. Lucia entered the room, her face a mask of resolve, though beneath the surface, her emotions churned violently. "Bring him," the Jaguar commanded, his eyes gleaming with a perverse delight. Two of his enforcers dragged Ramon into the center of the room. Father and daughter locked eyes, their gazes laden with years of unspoken pain, love, and despair that words could never capture. The Jaguar extended a gun toward Lucia. "Show me your loyalty, my dear." "Eliminate the traitor," he ordered. Lucia's hands shook as she grasped the cold metal of the gun, her mind racing for a solution, a way out of this nightmare. She looked at her father, then at the Jaguar, and finally down at the weapon in her hands. Time seemed to stretch in that unbearable moment. Suddenly, the sharp sound of an alarm shattered the tense silence. Detective Hernandez, unable to remain passive any longer, had triggered the fire alarm. Pandemonium erupted in the mansion. Taking advantage of the chaos, Lucia acted on instinct. Instead of turning the gun on her father, she aimed at the ceiling and fired, intensifying the confusion. "We're under attack," she screamed, sending the Jaguar's men into disarray. Amid the turmoil, Lucia grabbed her father's arm and pulled him toward a hidden exit she had discovered during her time in captivity. The Jaguar, enraged, bellowed orders as chaos reigned around him. Lucia and Ramon fled through a dark passage, their hearts pounding in sync with the distant wail of sirens. Detective Hernandez had called for backup, and it was on its way. But their escape was only the beginning. The Jaguar was a man who thrived on vengeance, and his wrath would not be easily quenched. As they emerged into the cold night, the air biting against their skin, Lucia knew that the most dangerous part of their journey had just begun. The sirens grew louder, merging with the sounds of chaos within the mansion. "This way," Lucia whispered urgently, guiding her father through the garden shadows. Years of survival had taught her every blind spot, every hidden path. Ramon stumbled, breathless with fear and exhaustion, as they raced against time. Their fight for freedom had begun, but the jaguar's reach was long, and the night was still young. Past would take time to heal. As Ramon lay in Lucia's arms, struggling to hold on, he whispered, "You were always my strength, Lucia. Never forget that." Lucia clung to him, her heart breaking as she whispered back, "We're not done yet, Dad. You have to fight. We've come too far to lose everything now." Her voice wavered, but the fierce determination in her eyes never faltered. The warehouse, now eerily silent, felt like a tomb as the weight of their struggle pressed down on them. The chaos of gunfire and shouts faded into the background, leaving only the sound of Ramon's labored breathing and Lucia's desperate pleas. Detective Hernandez approached them, his face etched with the toll of the night's events. He knelt beside them, his eyes filled with both sorrow and respect. "We got him, Lucia," he said softly. "The jaguar won't hurt anyone ever again." Lucia nodded, her tears mingling with the dirt on her face. "But at what cost?" she whispered, looking down at her father. Ramon's eyes fluttered open, and he managed a weak smile. "It's over, my little girl," he said, his voice barely audible. "You did it." The words hung in the air, bittersweet and heavy with the price they had paid. Hernandez radioed for medical assistance, his hands trembling slightly as he relayed the situation. Time seemed to stretch as they waited, each second feeling like an eternity. Lucia stroked her father's hair, her mind racing with memories of their past, of better days before their lives had been shattered by the jaguar's cruelty. Finally, the paramedics arrived and Ramon was lifted onto a stretcher. Lucia stayed by his side, clutching his hand as they rushed him to the hospital. The drive was a blur of flashing lights and sirens, but all Lucia could focus on was her father's face, pale and fragile, yet still holding on to life. At the hospital, they were separated as doctors and nurses swarmed around Ramon. Lucia was left alone in the waiting room, her mind a chaotic mess of fear, hope, and guilt. Detective Hernandez sat beside her, offering silent support. After what felt like hours, a doctor emerged, his expression grave but not without a glimmer of optimism. "Your father is stable," he said, and Lucia felt a wave of relief wash over her, nearly buckling her knees. "He's not out of the woods yet, but he's a fighter. He has a chance." Lucia nodded, her heart swelling with a mixture of gratitude and exhaustion. "Thank you," she whispered, feeling the weight of everything crashing down on her. The jaguar was defeated, his empire dismantled, but the battle had taken its toll. Lucia knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult, but for the first time in years, she allowed herself to believe that they could rebuild, that they could find peace. As dawn broke over the city, casting a soft golden light through the hospital windows, Lucia stood by her father's bedside. Ramon was asleep, his face relaxed for the first time in what felt like an eternity. She reached out and gently squeezed his hand, a silent promise that they would face whatever came next together. Outside, the remnants of the jaguar's reign were being cleaned up, and the city slowly waking up to a new day. But for Lucia and Ramon, this dawn marked the beginning of their new chapter, one written with the pain of the past, but also with the hope of a future they could finally shape for themselves. As Lucia watched the first rays of sunlight touch her father's face, she knew that no matter how scarred they were, they had survived. Together they would heal. Together they would find their way. The remnants of the past clung to them, heavy and relentless, reminding them that the scars of their ordeal would not vanish overnight. They had endured together, surviving against all odds, but the path to redemption was only beginning to unfold. The warehouse was a scene of utter chaos. The air was thick with the sound of gunfire and the anguished cries of the wounded. Lucia knelt beside her father, Ramon, her hands trembling as they desperately pressed against his bleeding chest. Every second felt like an eternity, her heart racing with the fear of losing him. "Dad, you can't leave me." "Not now. Not like this," she whispered, her voice breaking. Tears streamed down her face, mingling with the blood that stained her hands. Her world was unraveling before her eyes, and all she could do was plead. Ramon gazed up at his daughter, his eyes softened by a love that had long been buried beneath the weight of his mistakes. "Lucia, I'm so sorry for everything," he rasped, the words heavy with regret. Around them, the battle raged on. Hernandez and his team fought valiantly, the sounds of their struggle echoing throughout the warehouse as they faced off against the Jaguar's men. The stench of gunpowder filled the air, suffocating in its intensity. Amid this chaos, the Jaguar, seeing his empire crumble, made a desperate attempt to escape. His movement toward the exit caught Lucia's eye, and at that moment, a decision crystallized within her. This had to end. "Hold on, Dad," she whispered, planting a tender kiss on Ramon's forehead before rising to her feet. The pain and anger that had simmered within her for years now fueled her every step. With unwavering determination, Lucia chased after the Jaguar, closing the distance between them just as he reached his car. "It's over," Lucia's voice cut through the night as she aimed the gun she had picked up from the floor. The Jaguar turned to face her, his expression a volatile mix of fury and fear. "It never ends, Lucia," he sneered, defiance laced in every word. "There will always be someone like me." "Maybe," Lucia replied, her voice steady and cold, "but you won't be here to witness it." A single shot rang out, echoing in the stillness that followed. Moments later, Hernandez arrived, finding Lucia standing over the Jaguar's lifeless body, the weight of what she had done settling heavily upon her. "It's done," she murmured, dropping the gun to the ground. Without another word, they rushed back to the warehouse, where paramedics were already tending to Ramon. "He's going to survive," one of them said, "but he needs to be rushed to the hospital immediately." As they lifted Ramon onto a stretcher, Lucia took his hand, her voice soft but filled with conviction. "We made it, Dad. It's finally over." Ramon's smile was weak, but the pride in his eyes was unmistakable. "I've always been proud of you, Lucia," he whispered. Lucia climbed into the ambulance beside him, never letting go of his hand as they left behind the place where their nightmare had ended and a new chapter of their lives was about to begin. Hernandez watched them depart, fully aware that while one battle had ended, another one far more personal was only just beginning. The battle for forgiveness, for healing, for a chance at a life they had long thought lost. Months passed. Lucia stood by the hospital window, watching as the dawn bathed the world in shades of pink and gold. Her father slept peacefully, his breathing steady, a stark contrast to the fragility of that night in the warehouse. Ramon's recovery had been slow and excruciating, but with each day, they claimed small victories. Lucia had stayed by his side throughout, confronting her shadows even as she helped him confront his. A soft knock on the door broke the stillness, and Detective Hernandez stepped inside, his voice low as he delivered the news she had been waiting for. "The judge accepted the deal. Your testimony dismantled the last remnants of the Jaguar's empire. You're granted full immunity." Lucia let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "And my father?" Hernandez's smile was small, but reassuring. "Given his condition and role, he's received a suspended sentence. He'll do community service, but he won't go to prison." At that moment, the tears Lucia had held back for so long finally fell. It was a catharsis, relief, gratitude, and the slow healing of a wound that had been open for too long. They returned to Ramon's room just as he stirred awake. Seeing Lucia's tears, concern flickered in his eyes. "What's wrong?" he asked, his voice rough from sleep. Lucia approached, taking his hand in hers, the weight of the moment pressing down on her. "It's over, Dad. It's over." As Hernandez explained the details, Lucia turned her gaze back to the window. The sun had fully risen, casting the city in a warm, hopeful light, a light that seemed to promise new beginnings, healing, and the possibility of a future unmarred by the horrors of the past. "What do we do now?" Ramon asked softly after Hernandez had left. Lucia's smile was radiant, a genuine expression of joy that she hadn't felt in years. "We live, Dad. We live." She settled beside him, their hands intertwined, both of them knowing that the road ahead would not be without its challenges. Some wounds would take time to heal, trust that needed rebuilding. But for the first time in what felt like an eternity, they had something that had once seemed out of reach: hope. As the day unfolded, father and daughter sat in quiet reflection, the promise of a future stretching out before them. Despite the scars they bore, that future was filled with possibilities, redemption, and a love that, against all odds, had been renewed. As we reach the end of this powerful journey, take a moment to reflect on everything you've witnessed. What have you learned from this story of redemption, resilience, and the power of hope? We'd love to hear from you. What is one lesson from this experience that you will carry with you and apply to your own life? Please share your thoughts and insights in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to leave a comment, like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more content that inspires and empowers. Your support means the world to us.